Thank you all for joining us for live Q&A and office hours with Dr. Naomi Sugie. This session is a follow-on to Dr. Sugie's video lecture that you've already watched. Once again, Dr. Naomi Sugie is an associate professor of criminology, law, and society, and by courtesy sociology at the University of California, Irvine School of Social Ecology. Sugie's research examines the consequences of incarceration and other forms of criminal justice contact for individuals and their families, with a particular focus on how the criminal justice system influences participation in the labor force, political systems, and other government institutions. I know that our participants are particularly excited to meet you, Naomi, because we read all about you in Matt's book. So you've got a lot of fans and interested parties here who are excited to chat with you. So we have a few people who would like to ask you some questions. And while I wait for them to start putting their hands up, I will, as moderator, jump in with a few. So let's see. Can you talk us through an example of the process you go through when determining the best methodological approach for your research?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. So glad to be here. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and having a good discussion. And so in terms of my process for research, it's really iterative. It goes back and forth between theoretical questions, policy relevant questions, things that I feel passionate about, and then methods, that are out there and available, feasibility. And so I know sometimes we're taught to have identify the gap and then insert the relevant method to fill the gap. It seems so kind of linear, but I think the process, at least for me, is very iterative. And it's about thinking about the gaps, trying to figure out what's feasible to do to fill some of those gaps, and then keep going back to what the literature says, going back to the methods, that sort of thing. And for me personally, since before graduate school, when I was working at the Vera Institute of Justice in New York, which is a nonprofit research organization that works around the criminal justice system, I always kind of was drawn to reentry and the challenges of reentry. So for my work, really trying to better understand reentry in order to figure out what are some more effective interventions and supports and resources that we can provide to people coming out of prison was really sort of my starting place. And then thinking about what sort of methods would be suited to trying to improve our understanding of that is where I went to. And that led me to smartphones, which was a whole huge methodological toolkit that I had to delve into and learn about and spend a lot of time, figuring out how to do well, especially back then in 2012, 2013.
So can you also, so I think your population of your research brings with it particular challenges for connection, right? So can you talk about the traditional methodological difficulties you find when studying hard to research or mobile groups and how your technology assisted methods addressed that?
Yeah, I think there's two really big main ways that smartphones in particular, or mobile phones, help with these methodological challenges specifically. And so the first one is that there are high rates of attrition when you're trying to longitudinally understand people's reentry experiences. So the typical longitudinal survey study, with the exception of Bruce Western, I have to say, but the typical existing reentry study that's out there really has a participation rate of about 60-ish% over time. And so you're losing a huge proportion of the people that that are likely the most important people that you want to try to understand their experiences and to figure out what sort of interventions might be most useful. And so you're not only missing a large group of people over time, but you're also missing like perhaps the most salient group of people that you want to try to understand their experiences. The second reason why phones, I think, are really important methodologically to address some of these challenges is that, at least in the case of reentry, there was a lot of qualitative evidence that suggested that one of the primary challenges of reentry is just the instability and the precariousness of experiences after release from prison. And when you're doing reentry survey studies, and those were the primary sort of sources of knowledge that we had, especially back in 2012, 2013, when you're doing these longitudinal survey studies where you're interviewing someone for an hour every few months, the questions you have to ask are very broad. You know, like, have you ever had any formal employment in the last 3 months? Have you been unstably housed in the last 3 months? They're really these like binary questions. There's some sense that you're trying to dig into them, but because it's, you know, trying to cover a large amount of time, and there's a lot of instability and precariousness, you just can't capture that with these retrospective survey questions and answers. So I think phones are really important for a variety of reasons, but especially for these two reasons when it comes to studying people's experiences after release from prison.
Todd Hall from the University of Virginia is going to ask our first question from a participant.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and sharing your talk with us. I am a rising second-year Ph.D. student in education policy at the University of Virginia. And I was really struck by the 89%, I believe it was 89% participation rate, at least initially, and also the group meetings before kind of consent. And so I was curious if you could speak more about that process, and also how you weighed sort of the risk and reward of having a group kind of consultation first, if things might go completely awry, but it seems like it worked out really well. So any tips from the field around that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really do think that having the group meeting ahead of time to talk about the project. So basically, what I did just to get us all on the same page is that every month I would randomly select people who are coming out of, who are recently released from prison on parole in Newark. And if they were eligible for this study and selected, we would all meet. I would invite them to meet, and we would have a group conversation that lasted anywhere from an hour to sometimes 2 hours about the project. And so this was before the individualized consent meetings, you know, where you go through the consent form. This was really talking about the project. And I think that that was critical to the high participation rate, because there's a lot of mistrust for good reason, and there's a lot of, you know, concerns that people have to. It's like, oh, I'm going to get a phone with service. This seems too good to be true, right? Like there has to be something like terribly wrong here. And so there's a lot of reasons why people would be skeptical, especially because they're on parole supervision. There's a lot of concerns. We can get more into it about, you know, in a question about ethics as well, but I laid some of those things out in the article. So I thought it was really, really, really important in this situation to just have a conversation about what were the aims of the study, why did I need to collect the types of data that I was trying to collect, how could people control the collection of that data without necessarily just leaving the study, you know, and what sort of, like, let's just talk out the concerns, you know, let's just talk about them. And you're right that it was scary in a lot of ways, because people raised all sorts of questions. You know, you really have no control over the environment and the dynamics. And so there's always the concern that like things are going to go kind of like off the rails, and that's a whole group of people that maybe, you know, may have participated except for this sort of potentially toxic conversation, right? But that actually never happened. People were, there was just such a mix of different people who, you know, some people chose not to participate and they said why, and other people felt really strongly that this seemed like a good thing. And so you just had, every month I had a mixture of people who kind of took on the role of advocate, took on the role of skeptic. And that's why it was such a great, that's why these conversations were so lengthy, and also why I think people felt comfortable to participate in a study like this. I forgot the second question. Was there, sorry, what was the second question?
No, I think you answered it. It was just more of an intro. And I will also briefly say I'm from Jersey City, New Jersey. My brother went to NJIT in Newark, so just shout out to Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Mom's from Hillside over here. So yes, love New Jersey. Okay, so I have a question while we start to get some hands up in the crowd. So can we talk a little bit about how you got from the idea to using these cell phones to the actual use of them? So I don't want to assume anything about your background. Maybe I don't know if you studied computer science. I don't know if you're a telecommunications whiz, but can you talk us through how you got from the inception of this idea to the actual practice for those of us who are thinking about using innovative methods, and also with partnering with people who are not necessarily in our academic lane?
Yeah, there's a lot of steps that went from the idea, like, and thinking like, is this feasible? Is this like, can I do this? To actually, you know, handing out phones and recruiting people after those group conversations. So I would say that the kind of seed of inspiration came from actually Matt Salgonik's computational social science grad methods class at Princeton that I took. So we're trying to think about, you know, different methods, different ideas, and his class was just a survey of different types of tech-informed, tech-based digital methods to do social science research. And so it was kind of like a taste, similar to what you all are doing here for this Summer Institute. And I really latched on to the idea that you could collect, you know, trace data, that people were using wearable sensors, like all sorts of things like that, which ultimately I never went in that direction, right? It was really, I mean, I did in terms of GPS and call logs, but I didn't go like the full like bio sort of sensors and saliva testing and all of that we were reading at the time. A lot of what we were reading was actually methods-wise was from outside of sociology and outside of social sciences, because this is back in like 2000, I guess 2010, 2011. And there really just wasn't a lot out there from the social sciences. So Matt was trying to like take things from these other places to kind of give us inspiration about what we could do as social sciences, if it made sense for our research question. And so that's kind of where that seed of inspiration came from, as I was also trying to grapple with how do we study reentry? How do we forward knowledge about reentry? Even though there are these huge kind of longitudinal multi-million-dollar surveys that were being conducted at that time. You know, I'm just a little graduate student with hardly any funds. How do I fit into this, you know, area of research where there's these huge institutional players like Urban Institute conducting big studies of reentry? And so that's kind of how I came to the initial idea. And then it was just about talking to people, partnering with computer scientists, because I do not have a background in computer science. I had to learn a lot of the jargon, a lot of the ways that computer scientists looked at problems, how they built applications. You know, it was a lot of trying to like talk with those other disciplines to really understand what I was doing. And even today, I would say, you know, I was kind of reflecting, it's 2021. And I was reflecting on like, you know, what the situation was like back in 2011 or so when I was doing this. And there still are not that many social scientists, at least in sociology and criminology, using phones. And so if there's anything you take away from today, is to really think about phones as a data collection tool. It's something that the people can do, that students can do. It's much more feasible now. Lots of other disciplines are using phones. There's so much to draw from psychological sciences, especially social psychology. And we're just kind of behind on that. So, you know, so I would just kind of make that plug. But yeah, there's a lot of, you know, you have to learn a whole new method, basically, right? And you have to get that information from various pieces and players.
Yandu is going to ask our next question. We have folks right now who are trying to figure out their projects. So I would encourage people, if you're still looking at your methods, maybe you want to use cell phones. Maybe you ask us for funding for cell phones. Ask and you shall receive. Yandu, take it away.
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm Yandu. I'm a 6th-year PhD student at McGill University in the School of Communication Sciences and Disorders. So my question is about the great response rate that you had for your surveys. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate more as to why you had such a great response rate with the surveys, and if you had any tips about making surveys that people want to complete.
Yeah, so yeah, so I had a very like kindergarten level version of gamification. So basically on the home page of the app, there was a little bar, a little like thermometer bar. And each time they filled out a survey, that bar would increase and go up. And then once they hit like a certain threshold, which was at 75% of surveys completed for the week, then they actually got a gift card. So there was a gamification gift card element. I mean, it was like very incentivized. But, you know, some people ask like, oh, they got a weekly gift card, like, you know, it's a $15 weekly gift card, something like that. And I was asking them to complete 2 to 3 surveys a day. So in my mind, I think that that's more than reasonable to compensate people for their time. And that was like the little gamification thing that I incorporated. I would also say that my surveys were really, really brief. You know, they were really brief. They were only the random survey that came randomly throughout the day that was pinging at random times. That was probably 20 seconds to complete. The survey at the end of the day was like 2 to 3 minutes to complete. You know, so these are short surveys because they're doing them every day. So, you know, that seems pretty burdensome if they were longer than that. And it's for 3 months, which is also a long period of time to ask people to complete surveys on this sort of frequent basis. There's lots of other ways that you can structure how you send surveys, the frequency you send them, the type of survey you send. And actually APOR, which is the Public Opinion Research group, they keep an updated kind of best practices report about how to do phone-based surveys. And they have tons of details about like how to format the screen, like how many words to put per question. It gets very, very detailed about best practices around the format of those questions. But I would say, you know, kind of balancing incentives with like perceived burden.
Our next question is from Dr. Ebony Russ.
Hi, Dr. Sugie. Ebony Russ here. I am a newly minted PhD from Howard University, Department of Sociology and Criminology, and now a research fellow at Harvard University. So my dissertation is centered on precisely what you do, reentry healthcare. So I focused and developed a survey to address some of the, and identify some of the needs surrounding cardiovascular diseases among formerly incarcerated African Americans. And I took on many of the similar techniques that you utilize. So I incentivized my survey. I provided a phone interview modality for collecting data. And then the pandemic hit, so a lot of things changed, and I had to strategize differently. But specifically, my question is surrounding your response rate and rapport building. So I know that you had group meetings to discuss consent forms, and then also providing the smartphone to provide support to increase the response rate for your surveys. So throughout that process, did you experience any incidences where you needed to kind of manage some of the additional needs or requests in terms of housing, food instability, various needs that research suggests that the reentry population definitely needs support with? So did you experience any of that? And if so, how did you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought you were, I was kind of like nodding vigorously because I thought at first you were going to say, did you experience any requirements to provide support in terms of like using the phone? Which I just want to quickly say, I was on call 24/7. It was really terrible actually in that regard. Because I was getting all sorts of calls about like, I can't text, I can't place a phone call, what's going on? You know, like I was like Verizon technical support even during like Christmas and New Year's, I was doing it. So I thought you were going to say that, which I actually think is an important component of building rapport. Because it said call Naomi right on the home page. There was a button. And so literally they could just push that button and call me and, ask me a question. It was, I would say 90% of the questions were about phone support. But you're right that there were people who did have questions about other aspects of reentry. And this project had a particular focus on job finding, like job search, employment. And so actually a lot of the questions I got were around like job finding and employment. But there were also, sometimes where I would get other questions, and I really didn't, there was a resource center, reentry resource center in downtown Newark. And so I had made a partnership with them, just informal, just seeing what sort of resources they provided. But honestly, I didn't feel really confident directing anyone to any of the resources that I knew about, unfortunately, because Newark is not like a service, what do I want to say? It's not a particularly dire place in terms of services, but they're just so overwhelmed. The service provider is so overwhelmed that it was really hard to feel really confident about referring people to those sorts of services. And it was the same sort of referrals that a parole officer would have done, I think, if they got the same sort of question. So that was the extent of what I encountered. It's a really hard, as you know, it's a really, really, really challenging period of time for people. I would love to connect with you offline though and hear more about what you found with your research, because that sounds, it sounds like we have a lot of connections. So
Sure, I'll send my information. Thank you.
I love when collaboration unfolds in front of our eyes. So we're going to have Nicole up next. I'm going to ask you a quick question before that. So our participants can apply for funding from SICSS Umbrella for between $250 to $2,500. And I know sometimes you're just like, I need the money, but I don't know what I need it for yet. So if you had that amount when you were doing this project, besides hiring tech support, what else might you have spent it on, or what would you recommend people think about in terms of funding when they're doing a project like this? What were the unexpected costs? And then after that, I will turn it over to Nicole, if Nicole still has a question.
Yeah, I think with the options that are available today that are off the shelf for researchers doing research with phones, you can do smartphone research with a data collection app for $2,500. I had to raise over $100,000 for my dissertation, actually. So I spent a huge amount of time raising money. But these days, there are a lot of options. And I would say you could even take that money and start collecting data right now, next week.
All of us are like mouth agape on the $100,000. That's an expensive, that's a platinum dissertation there. All right, Nicole, next question is yours.
Hello, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. This is a really exciting conversation for me. I am also a newly minted PhD in 2020 and a new assistant professor. I'll be starting in the fall at Howard University in the Department of Sociology and Criminology, so fellow sociologist. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, you have already elaborated a little bit about the challenges for such an innovative method. You talked a little bit about the funds and being on call 24/7. I was wondering if there were any other sort of hiccups maybe you encountered. And then also if you could speak to the maybe like a work and personal balance, because you talked about building rapport with your participants and sort of being disappointed by the referrals that you were able to provide for them. So maybe speaking a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, great questions. It was a very stressful dissertation. I'll say that. Dissertations are always stressful. They're high stakes. You have a lot of skin in the game. It's stressful, right? But I think when you're doing something like this, where it's really high risk, high reward, it is very, very stressful. So you know, I had to find ways during the field work, which did go on for a year and a half of my life, really to manage stress and to compartmentalize it so it didn't overflow into other areas of my life, which is easier said than done, I think. But yeah, there were lots of challenges. There were just so many challenges. I don't want to sugarcoat anything. You know, obviously you can collect data starting next week, but like, do you want to collect data starting next week is a different question. There are, you know, especially at that time, I think that some of these things are still applicable. Some of these things are less applicable. So much from other disciplines that are using phones to collect data nowadays, especially mHealth, especially psychologists. But I think maybe the biggest challenge that I ran into was something that people warned me about from the very, very beginning that actually almost derailed my project, which is from the very beginning, I had a whole lot of skeptics. I basically had Matt and my dissertation advisor, the late Diva Pager, who were like, and my other committee member, Sarah McClanahan, those were my like cheerleaders. But pretty much everyone else were saying this can never happen. As soon as you give smartphones to people, they will take them and sell them. Like they will not, you know, they will just take them and sell them. They will not participate. You could never do this. And so a lot of the work, especially at the beginning, yeah, is just trying to prove those people wrong. And so that's where I had seed funding. So the $2,500 could also be seed funding to get the evidence that you need to prove those people wrong. And so I think that though, if I didn't have my cheerleaders, like I would have just kind of gone back to the drawing board. So it was really important to have those cheerleaders and, you know, to have them like believe in you. And you know, when I actually carried it, so I asked people this question in focus groups, and I like tried to really like see, are people going to turn around and sell these? Are, you know, is this like a effort that's going to go nowhere? And everything I was hearing from people on the ground is like, no, this is great. We need to do this, you know? And then actually when I did the field work, when I actually carried out, you know, the data collection, all I could think about was people are going to steal these phones, because it was just like something that was in my head from all these people telling me that. And at the end of the day, we did have 3 phones out of 156 participants total, 135 in the smartphone group, but we had 3 phones that were stolen. 2 phones were recovered out of those 3. So I just want to say, like, I think the reason I say it's a challenge is because that was something that was always a barrier that I was always thinking about that potentially derailed the project. But at the end of the day, it wasn't even the real challenge. You know, the real challenge was being on call 24/7, right? But, you know, I just think it's a good lesson learned that if you do something innovative, you are going to have people who are haters. Because it's innovative. And so I think that instead of taking that and saying, no, I'm going to go back to the drawing board, I think if you have really, really smart people that believe in you, that are saying, no, this is good, this is right, you should keep going with this, like, then, you know, that's I would reframe the hate and say, no, you're doing something innovative. You're doing something challenging. I think
Before we move on to the next question, did you want to finish your thought there, Naomi?
I was just going to say about the work-life balance. I think work-life balance is so important in academia, like dissertation, you know, it's throughout all the stages, right? Assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. It's like, it is the constant challenge in our profession. And if you can find ways to prioritize that self-care, I think that that is going to help you in the long run, right? Because you just can't do the sort of creative thinking that you want to do and the innovation that you want to do if you're tired and burnt out. And so that's what I have to tell myself, because I am a workaholic. I have to tell myself that and remind myself that over and over, that that's part of an investment into my career, is taking care of myself.
Before I pass the mic to Rashan, I just want to add that life is precious. We all know that, especially after the pandemic and seeing all the things unfolding in our country. And you know, time isn't promised to us, and that's, if that's evident anywhere, it's in the loss of Diva Pager to the sociological community. She was taken from us way too early and had so much more scholarship to give, and I'm so glad we have you, Naomi. You know, the next generation, having been mentored by her. So I'm going to turn things over to Rashan next for the next question.
Hi, Dr. Sugie. My name is Rashan Miles. I'm a 3rd year at the University of Mississippi, and I'm in the social welfare program. And while my work looks at particularly social workers who work with clients who have infectious disease, and looking at compassion fatigue, and just in addition to that, I'm looking at ways to mitigate compassion fatigue, and in particular looking at public spaces as a possibility. And I say that in thinking about interventions and among formerly incarcerated, And if that isn't one's wheelhouse, and also if you weren't doing a dissertation in this area or in that particular population at that time, would I don't know, like a case study be effective in kind of just trying to make connections with, say, I don't know, libraries or other public entities or spaces? And if a case study, meaning like one or two participants working closely with them and doing surveys, if that is also effective in kind of moving the needle forward and then thinking about a larger project later.
Yeah, and I would love to talk more about the details of that. I think, you know, just some quick reactions. I think compassion fatigue is a really, really, really important concept that just applies to so many different experiences and jobs and occupations, but just experiences, right, of people's experiences. And so I would say that, you know, we also, you know, while we need to understand that, like you're saying, I think your focus on interventions as the end goal or supports as the end goal, or trying to think about how, not just documenting the negative, which is what, you know, what, and this goes for myself too. But also trying to keep that eye on understanding how people are resilient in the experience of compassion fatigue, you know, and trying to focus on resilience as well, as part of a way to think about interventions.
I'm going to jump back in with a question. Sadly, we're going to focus on the haters for just a minute. And it's so important for all of us to have faculty sponsor us and promote us, not just on the job market, but when we're students. And Matt and Chris have just become phenomenal mentors and friends of mine. And it's changed my experience as a graduate student. So I want to ask you a little bit about those haters. So did you find the IRB process particularly daunting because of your choice of methodology? And how did you, what were the most common statements from the haters who are going to hate that sort of came to you? And how did you, beyond those individuals that supported you, find it within yourself to push past them, those things?
Yeah, so the quick answer to the IRB is actually, so this goes back to this disconnect, you know, 2011 versus 2021. The IRB posed no problems. It was easier than some analyses of other data that I collected for other projects that were not nearly, in my perspective, as risky. It was a smooth process. So I attribute that to the idea that at the time, IRBs are composed of our faculty peer. And really, they just didn't know enough to know about the risks. It's like, it's the opposite of what you want for an IRB. So that's why, actually, this is where a lot of my mentorship with Matt came into play. Matt was just like, don't trust the IRB to give you the pass, the green light. You know, like, you need to do this project according to the ethics that you have for yourself and for the discipline. You can't, because, you know, just because they don't know enough, like, doesn't mean that you're good to go. So, so he helped me, like, try to figure out other ways to see if I was doing a ethically sound, sort of secure, if my process was secure, if my data were secure, you know, if I was using the right sort of encryption methods, like all of these considerations. which were still being, there were at the time, those were being talked about and discussed. And then also there were these very high profile incidents of accidental data disclosure, ranging from, and Matt talks about some of these things in his book, ranging from like identifying the health background of like the governor of Massachusetts, I think, to some other things about social media. Anyways, there's like a bunch of kind of data disclosures that you don't want to ever be a part of, right, with your research. And so, so that was sort of the fear that was driving me to try to really go outside of the IRB. And so I actually consulted with computer scientists and said, this is my process. This is what we've put into place. How are you going to break into this system and get my data? And so we had a conversation about that, and those sorts of conversations were really, really important, I think, because that was more up to date. They were really like, they knew what was going on in the moment, as opposed to the IRB, which we all know is like much more slower moving. They're slower to catch up. The other thing is, so a lot of the haters, I mean, the main thing about it was really just, this is not feasible. Like, this isn't going to work because people are going to take the phones. They're not going to fill out surveys. They're going to lie on surveys. They're going to leave their phones at home. They're not going to take their phones with them. Just lots of like, why would this ever work with this population, with this group of people coming out of prison? And I think a lot of those concerns really stem from stereotypes and stigma and discrimination. At one point, about a few days, I remember like maybe it was a week, it was like very close to me actually launching the project. I was in partnership with Verizon. Verizon was my, corporate partner in all of this, not meaning that they gave me any money, because they didn't, even though I asked, but that they helped me with the phones. They provided training on the phones. They were very supportive, actually, in a lot of it. But about a week before we were set to go into the field, someone higher up at Verizon heard about this project and said, there's no way we can do this, and pulled out. And the rationale was all around prisoners and criminal justice and criminals. And so that was the most like explicit, sort of like in your face acknowledgement that you can't do this because you are giving phones and service plans to people with records. But I think all of these sort of pushbacks that I was hearing were around crime and were around people not being truthful, and I think it is all related to that. In the case of the Verizon situation, Diva actually, I came to her, I was like, what am I going to do? This person just pulled out, I have no phones, basically. Diva, she stepped in, she dropped everything. She got on the phone with that manager and she just shut him down. It was like the most amazing thing I had ever seen. She was just like, no nonsense. She just shut it down. And anytime he brought up criminal justice, she just shut it down. And she was amazing. And if it wasn't for her, Verizon would have pulled out, I think.
So can you talk a little bit about the digital archive that you created, UCI Prison Pandemic? So one of the things that is allowed for our site, in addition to partnering with folks on the creation of a peer-reviewed paper, is the creation of some sort of resource. So can you talk to us about the process of creating this resource, what it's for, and how it's being used?
Yeah, and thank you for highlighting that. And I would love for everyone to see that website. That is what I spend the vast majority of my time doing these days. Prison Pandemic is a digital archive. Basically, we are collecting stories from people who are incarcerated during the pandemic. And this was in response, so basically when, last spring, when it became clear how COVID spreads, we were all of us, right, were concerned about prisons. Prisons are just so vulnerable for so many reasons to COVID. And so we were trying to do things, trying to write op-eds. Honestly, it was incredibly frustrating, right? Nothing was being done. No one was responding to anybody, or that's what it felt like. So then we raised money here at UCI to provide PPE to prisons because they were not providing soap. It was just so the basic necessities for trying to keep your area clean, so we raised $10,000 to provide PPE to our prisons. And in doing that fundraising event, we actually had a lot of formerly incarcerated people submit testimonials about how important this is. And in making that 2-minute video, there were just way too many people who wanted to submit stories than we could accommodate for that video. So we decided, you know what? Prisons are locked down. At that point, they had locked down the prisons. No visitors, limited phone calls, no in-prison programming, no journalist access. These were institutions that were locked down, that were non-transparent, that were totally not open to the public. And we decided we are going to set up a hotline that's going to collect calls from these institutions so people can describe what is going on in their facilities. And this was also in response to staff coming to us anonymously saying, no one's wearing masks. We have no PPE, none of us feel safe. And so we started this. We are still collecting. We've worked with 200 undergrad students at this point. They staff our hotline. We have our hotline Monday through Friday, 5 to 9 p.m. to collect calls from people. We've expanded to jails because, and we keep, every night we get multiple phone calls still. We're still doing it. And we also have received thousands of letters. And so at this point, we have almost 5,000 contributions. We're still going, and we're making them available. We set up a whole sort of process for how we redact these because we're very concerned about confidentiality, privacy, not getting anyone into trouble. And so we set up a whole process of redaction, and we've made available, we're trying to put as many stories as we can up. And those are on the website, and our long-term plans are to archive the entire collection in the UCI libraries. And so this is a data source. You can use it. We have graduate students at UCI who are coding the testimonies right now to highlight different things like coercive prison labor during the pandemic, people's decisions about making trade-offs for health versus public safety. There's all sorts of very interesting themes in there. And so you can use it right now if you want to for your research. And yeah, we want to make this available for now and then also 10 years from now.
It's incredible, the use of narrative in research and just to elevate stories. I'm a big fan of Marshall Ganz's work. And also I know Bahia Muhammad, who is one of our inaugural faculty co-chairs, also has a children's book on incarceration. She has a couple of them: Daddy's Coming Home, Mommy's Coming Home, The Prisoner Alphabet. LaTanya Sweeney, for those of you who don't know, I saw people shouted her out. I'm also a huge fan of hers. She has a children's book also. So thinking about the use of narrative and creativity, I wonder if when you started this work, you could have imagined that you would have been involved with the collection of stories. And if you are creative or one of our last speakers turned out to be a classically trained musician. So I feel like I should ask everyone, are you a poet? Do you sing?
No, but I've surrounded myself with creative and inspiring people. And yeah, we want to do all sorts of things. Like this summer where people are working to make a podcast out of the stories. UCI drama students already put on a play with some of these stories. We have a grant out right now asking for funding to put on an exhibit where people can come to UCI, pick up phones and listen to different testimonials from people. And so, you know, we're really trying to bring attention to this. And this crisis is still ongoing. There are still outbreaks in prisons right now and jails as well. And so, you know, even though it's kind of winding down out on the outside here, it is still very much a concern in prisons. And so we're just trying to spotlight the issue by doing these sort of creative endeavors. And it's a whole new world for me to try to apply for humanities funding. But, you know, we are actually a very poor project. We have done this with very little money. And so, you know, it's just a passion project, basically.
So we began our week, our 2-week experience at SICSS-Howard Mathematica, as many of the other 6 locations did, with questions of ethics. And when we originally talked about you coming in, you and I talked quite a bit about ethics also. So I'm hoping you can chat with us about your litmus test with the bar is. You talked a little bit and people started writing beneficence in the chat box, but if you could talk to us a little bit about the inner workings of your mind when it comes to ethics and your projects, especially with communities of color like ours and people that are vulnerable. So I will have one more question from the field after that.
Yeah, it's always at the very, very top of the priority list. And when going back to this talk, you know, when I was talking about balancing feasibility, when I talk about feasibility at the very beginning, when I was talking about that, like, I'm not just referring to whether I can carry this out, but whether it is, can I carry this out in an ethical way, right? And so I think ethics is really front and center throughout all of this work. Just because, like, people are retaliatory. I mean, you can't be naive when you do this work. I think, you know, you have to think about the worst case situation and plan for that. You know, I think in the case of the phone project specifically, it was an ongoing conversation about how to do this in a way where I feel really confident that people are protected and that the data is not going to be used to harm them in any way in terms of reincarceration, parole violations, any sort of way that they could be harmed by participation in the study. Balancing, you know, making sure that that I felt confident in that regardless of what the IRB said, with the idea that, like, we can't just not do these sorts of projects because that's also a form of, like, not providing opportunities to people to participate is also, like, I think an ethical consideration, right? To say, like, oh, we know best because this is too dangerous, like, we're not gonna put this opportunity out there, I think is also part of this debate about ethics. And so, you know, I think the phone study, at the time, there were lots of phone studies going on, even though this was 10 years ago, lots of phone studies, lots of undergraduate students participating in phone studies, lots of people participating in phone studies. But, like, you know, I think there were a lot of pushback in terms of, well, this group cannot participate in phone studies. And I think that you need to balance that sort of, you know, like, you need to balance that, which is not right? We need to provide opportunities to everyone with these concerns about privacy and confidentiality. So I hope that answered a little bit of sort of my general stance. But I think that throughout the entire project, you know, it's really about asking people, system impacted people, people from the community, like, what do you think about this? How can we improve this? And getting input and designing around that input at all stages.
I can't think of a better answer than that to finish on, unless there is a final bit of parting wisdom you'd like to share with our PhD students, PhD candidates, recent grads, faculty before tenure, and our postdocs that maybe you wished someone had said to you when you were a student and when you were just emerging as an assistant professor?
I think I would just say, like, as graduate students, you can do a lot of things. And don't feel like you can't do it because you're a graduate student. I think that if you look at, I was inspired by my advisors, you know, by Diva's dissertation. Diva's dissertation changed the world in terms of employment discrimination and employment discrimination policy. And so I think looking to those people who are inspiring and knowing that, you know, you can do that too, and taking that confidence into your work and taking risks, I think is always something that is the most fulfilling, you learn the most from, and we're in privileged positions. We can take those risks, you know? And so I think just living by that is a way to make our jobs more interesting, rewarding, and impactful.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Sugie. We just feel so privileged to have gotten the chance to learn more about your background and your work. And I know there are some interested parties in spending some additional time with you in office hours. So I am going to give you all the chance to go ahead and move to the office hours rooms. So they're set up right now, and I'm about to open. This is whether you signed up or not. Feel free to jump into one of those rooms. They are called office hours 5 to 5:10, office hours 5:10 to 5:20, and surprise, office hours 5:20 to 5:30. If we do not have folks in those rooms as we progress, we will do the amazing thing of giving Professor Sugie back some of her time, which every adult loves. So if you would like to chat with her, head to one of those 3 rooms right now. If you'd like to meet with your groups, feel free to head to one of the group rooms. If you would like to go home, that's okay too. So I do see a few people in office hours right now. Feel free to spread out if you want to get 10 minutes alone with her. Or you know, group is fine too. Thank you so much for your time, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in the morning. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.